Hi children, we continue with our second chapter acids, bases and salts, and today's topic is salts. We have completed the discussion of acids and bases. Now we have to discuss the topic salts. Okay, so let's start. Salts. So when we say salt, the term that comes to your mind will be the common salt, sodium chloride, that we use in a house for making dishes and all. Actually, sodium chloride is one of the examples of salts. Salts are a class of compounds which are formed by the neutralization reaction between an acid and a base. So, salts are compounds which are formed by the neutralization between an acid and a base. When an acid reacts with a base, we get salt and water. Such reactions are known as neutralization reactions that we have learned under the topic chemical properties of acids and bases. Okay, so salts are compounds which are formed by the reaction between acids and bases, and the sodium chloride, common salt that sodium chloride is actually the most common salt that is used. That's why it is known as common salt. Actually, it is one of the examples of salts. There are many different kinds of salts. They are formed by the reaction between acids and bases. Now, let's see how our salts are classified. The different types of salts. First one is neutral salts. Neutral salts. Okay. So, depending upon the nature of the acid and base taken, salts have different natures. It can be neutral, it can be acidic, or it can be basic. That depends upon the nature of the acids and bases taken. Okay. So, neutral salts are formed by the neutralization reaction between a strong acid and a strong base. So, both acid and base taken are strong. When they undergo neutralization reaction, nature of the salt formed will be neutral. Both are equally strong. So, the salt formed is neutral in nature and its pH is 7. It has exactly 7. pH value is exactly 7. Now, let us see examples. Let's see the examples. First one is sodium chloride. Now, looking at the name of the salt, the formula of the salt, you should be able to write the acid and base that constitute this salt. Then only you will be able to find out whether it is acidic, basic or neutral. You have questions like that. Classify the given salt as acidic, basic and neutral. So, only if you know the acid and base, only if you can identify the acid and base that form this salt, you will be able to say whether it is acidic, basic or neutral. Now, let us look at this. It is sodium chloride. Chloride is a salt of which acid? Hydrochloric acid. So, if it is a chloride, write hydrochloric acid as the acid. Now, the name of the base can be written by taking the metal. In the salt, there will be a metallic part. To that, you add hydroxide. Now, depending on the valencies of the metal, and hydroxide always have valency 1. Depending upon the valency of that metallic ion, you can write the formula. Now, this is sodium. Metal is sodium. We write hydroxide. Both have valency 1, so we write it as NaOH. So, both are strong. Sodium hydrochloric acid is a strong acid. Sodium hydroxide is a strong base. Both are strong. So, the salt formed is neutral. Now, another example is K2SO4. SO4 is the salt of SO4. Sulfate is the salt of which acid? Sulfuric acid. Sulfate is the salt of sulfuric acid. Another strong, actually sulfuric acid is the strongest acid. Then the base here, the metallic part here is potassium. Add hydroxide to that, you get potassium hydroxide. Both are strong. Strong acid, strong base. Again we have strong acid and strong base. So, the salt formed is neutral in nature. Now, the second type, acidic salt. So, here the salt has more acidic property. How can you get an acidic salt? By the neutralization between acid is strong acid and a weak base. So, acid is strong in nature and the base is weak. So, the salt formed will be having more acidic property. So, we call it as acidic salt. Okay. So, example, and since it is acidic in nature, its pH will be less than, pH value will be less than 7. Now examples. So we have to write the salt formed between strong acid and a weak base. So calcium sulfate, calcium sulfate, sulfate. So what is the acid? Sulfuric acid. Calcium base. Write the base with the metallic part, add hydroxide to that, calcium hydroxide. Since calcium has valency 2, we write it as CaOH twice. Calcium sulfate formed between sulfuric acid and calcium hydroxide. Strong acid, weak base. Second one is magnesium chloride. Chloride is a salt of hydrochloric acid, as I told you. Since it is magnesium, we write MgOH twice, the base. Okay. So strong acid, weak base. So the nature, overall nature will be acidic in nature. The acid power is more, so the salt formed will be acidic in nature and pH value will be less than 7. So that's about acidic salt, formed by the neutralization between a strong acid and a weak base, and since they have more acidic properties, the salt formed is acidic and pH value of such salts will be less than 7. Examples are calcium sulfate and magnesium chloride. Now the third type is basic salts. So how are basic salts formed? By the neutralization between, so it has more basic power. So base will be strong base, weak acid. So children, the first thing is you should have an idea about strong examples of strong acids, strong bases, weak acids, weak bases you should have. Then only you will be able to identify whether the salt given is acidic, basic or neutral. Okay. Strong base and weak acid, and the pH will be greater than, pH here will be great. Basic power is more, so pH will be greater than 7. So let's see the examples. First one is sodium carbonate, Na2CO3. Carbonate is a salt of carbonic acid, a weak acid, carbonic acid that you have learned. And since it is sodium hydroxide, you have to write sodium hydroxide. Weak acid, strong base, so the resulting salt is basic in nature. Second one is, the name of this one is sodium acetate. This is a salt of acetic acid, sodium acetate. So CH3COOH that we have learned under weak acids plus sodium hydroxide. Weak acid and a strong base, you get sodium acetate, a weak, so basic salt. Okay. So those are basic salts formed by the neutralization between a strong base and a weak acid. So it has more basic power and its pH value will be greater than 7. Examples are sodium carbonate, which is formed by the neutralization between carbonic acid and sodium hydroxide, and sodium acetate, which is formed by the reaction between acetic acid and sodium hydroxide. Okay, so that's about different types of salts. So salts are compounds which are formed by the neutralization of an acid and a base. So depending upon the nature of the acid and bases taken, we have 3 different types of salts. Neutral salts formed between a strong acid and a strong base. Examples are sodium chloride, potassium sulfate, etc. Now acidic salts are there. Acidic salts are formed by the reaction between strong acids and weak bases. Examples are calcium sulfate, magnesium chloride, etc. Now basic salts are formed between strong bases and weak acids. As basic power is more. It is examples are pH value will be greater than 7. Examples are sodium carbonate and sodium acetate. Okay. Now write a question. Now we can write a question based on this. Write down this question. Classify the following. Classify the following as acidic, basic and neutral salts. A KCl, B MgSO4, C K2CO3, and D NH4Cl. Okay. Now take KCl. How to identify whether it is a neutral salt, acidic salt or basic salt? First thing is you identify the acid and the base which constitute this salt. Now understand their nature. That's how we identify it as an acidic, basic or a neutral salt. So KCl, what is the acid? Since it is chloride, the acid is hydrochloric acid. Now what is the base? Metallic part plus hydroxide, KOH. Now look at their nature. Strong acid, strong base. So what is the nature of this salt? It is neutral. KCl is a neutral salt because it is formed by the neutralization between a strong acid and a strong base. It's Cl and KOH. Both are strong, so it is a neutral salt. Now MgSO4, magnesium sulfate. Sulfate is a salt of sulfuric acid. Then what is the base? Magnesium hydroxide. Formula is MgOH twice. Now look at their nature. Strong acid. Acid is strong. Sulfuric acid is a strong acid. Strong acid between weak base. Strong acid and weak base. So it will have more acidic nature. So this is an acidic salt. Strong acid and weak base, so acidic salt. Now K2CO3. What is the acid here? Carbonic acid. Carbonate is a salt of carbonic acid plus KOH, potassium hydroxide. Weak acid, strong base. So what is its nature? Basic nature. So it is a basic salt. Now NH4Cl, ammonium chloride. So hydrochloric acid, since it is a chloride, acid is hydrochloric acid plus the base is ammonium hydroxide. Strong acid, weak base, so it is acidic in nature. So this is how we identify, we distinguish between a neutral, acidic and basic salts. First thing is you learn strong acids, weak acids, strong bases, weak bases. Then only you will be able to do these type of questions. You should have an idea about strong and weak acids and bases. Then only you will be able to identify the nature of salt. I hope it is clear to you. So that is the end of today's class.